The streets of Hong Kong are quiet these days, the huge demonstrations of recent times long gone. The pro-democracy movements have been tamed and Beijing's patriots are fully in power. As one pro-China politician put it, the traitors have been excluded. This week we talk for a second time to Regina Ip, longtime lawmaker in Hong Kong's Legislative Council and head of the pro-Beijing New People's Party. Hong Kong reunified with China under the kind of repressive rule that tolerates no dissent. Are you happy now with that?
There is no rollback of freedoms. Our freedoms are well protected under our basic law.
The biggest symbols of resistance in Hong Kong have been the June the 4th vigils, recalling the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. But last year, Beijing had had enough. Hong Kong police shut down the organisers, froze their assets, and arrested their leaders. The past is once again being buried and rewritten. What kind of future for Hong Kong now? Regina Ip, welcome to Conflict Zone. Welcome back to Conflict Zone.
Thank you for having me again, Tim.
When we last spoke to you in June 2020, you were full of comforting assurances about the one country, two systems arrangement and how it would allow Hong Kong to preserve its 1997 lifestyle. Do you think that disqualifying opposition politicians, arresting independent journalists, closing down critical media outlets, sacking teachers, censoring school books, do you think that's preserving the pre-1997 lifestyle in Hong Kong?
Actually, in the 1980s, when Mr. Deng Xiaoping talked about preserving the lifestyle, he referred to continuing the races and the dancing. And racing and dancing are still going on in Hong Kong.
And that's about it, isn't it? That's about all there is going on.
No. We continue to have very lively media, very vigorous scrutiny of government performance by legislators under the new electoral arrangements. New members are falling over each other to question the government on its performance. So the same vibrant Hong Kong spirit is still there.
Human rights organizations, Western governments, UN experts all see it rather differently, don't they? The Beijing and Hong Kong authorities have moved aggressively to roll back rights in Hong Kong. That's the view of Human Rights Watch, certainly the view of all those other organizations. And that's exactly what you wanted, isn't it? Hong Kong reunified with China under the kind of repressive rule that tolerates no dissent. Are you happy now with that?
That's an extremely unfair and biased view. There is no rollback of freedoms. Our freedoms are well protected under our basic law, which has incorporated the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. On electoral rights, we even allow foreign nationals to vote, And electoral rights are subject to restrictions all over the world. So our civil and political rights are alive and well. There has been no derogation whatsoever.
Really, it doesn't look like it. The big clampdown on political opposition began in November 2020, didn't it? Beijing imposed a new law allowing the disqualification of so-called unpatriotic opposition members from the Legislative Council. You approved of that, didn't you? 4 sitting members were kicked out with immediate effect, no right to respond.
It's totally unfair to describe that as a clampdown. What our central authorities did is to make a decision requiring all people taking up public office, including elected office, to abide by their oath to uphold the basic law and to bear allegiance to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. That's not too unreasonable to ask. That's not too much to ask. All parliaments, all governments ask their legislators, public servants to take an oath of loyalty. I think Gerry Adams was not able to take up his seat in Westminster because he refused to take an oath of loyalty to the Queen.
Well, we're not
It's a
talking about
universal
Gerry
practice.
Adams or the British Parliament. We're talking about the Legislative Council in Hong Kong. 4 sitting members kicked out with immediate effect. And as the Hong Kong Bar Association put it at the time, a violation of the principles of fairness in the rule of law. Let's be honest, this was a shoddy, underhand move taken simply to please your bosses in Beijing, wasn't it?
The 4 members who were disqualified in November 2020, they were already disqualified by the returning officers when they ran for electoral office because they failed to abide by their legislative oath. We are talking about 4 members who consistently resisted China's sovereignty and did everything to oppose our integration with the nation or complying with provisions of the basic law. These are essentially anti-China activists. You know, they have no place in our legislature.
Anti-China, they were critical of China. There's a difference, isn't there? You put a different spin on it. Being critical of China is one thing. Anti-China. Why shouldn't they object? That's what they're there to do. They can object to anything.
Well, they have objected to everything to do with China: national security, national education, high-speed rail connecting Hong Kong to China. They even objected to anti-epidemic funding to help people affected by the pandemic. They objected to everything. These are just rejectionists, you know, who has harmed Hong Kong with their mindless opposition.
Well, you say harmed Hong Kong. Beijing couldn't wait to celebrate. Its Hong Kong liaison office even declared a new rule, didn't it? The political rule that Hong Kong must be governed by patriots shall be firmly guarded, it said. Governed by patriots. What happened to the high degree of autonomy promised to Hong Kong in the basic law that you were just waving at me the other moment? That was what the day it got trashed by the Hong Kong executive, wasn't it?
The principle that Hong Kong should be governed by patriots was put forward from day one. You know, as soon as the one country, 2 systems were put forward by Mr. Deng Xiaoping and on behalf of the Chinese leadership. There is no conflict between one country, 2 systems arrangement and the principle of Hong Kong should be governed by patriots. Of course, for one country, 2 systems to be sustainable, we must be run by people who truly support the sovereignty, security of our country and abide by the Constitution and the basic law. That's a no-brainer.
Regina, the definition of a patriot is what? Someone like you who just does exactly what Beijing tells them to do? No opposition, no division, you just clap when they tell you to.
You are being very unfair to me. I have been critical of the government on many fronts, and I have objected to many government projects. You know, I did not vote on Mrs. Lam's favorite project, Tomorrowland Town. You know, and a patriot is not defined in our law. You know, all that our law requires is to uphold the basic law and to bear allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR. If legislators, you know, work in cahoots with the US and call for sanctions on Hong Kong, call for removal of our special trading status, how can you regard them as being loyal to Hong Kong or supportive of the basic law?
Have you ever publicly contradicted Beijing about anything? Have you?
I think I have voiced my opinions very candidly and very forcefully on many matters.
You haven't answered my question. Did you ever raise an eyebrow about the human rights vacuum that exists on the mainland? Have you ever talked about that?
I don't think it is right for me to judge others. The mainland has a different system. Anyway, China also set high store
You're part
on
of China. You're part of China.
Protection.
You're part of China.
I don't think people should judge without all the facts before them. If people have not done full research and do not know what's really going on, they should not get on a high horse and point a finger at others. I don't believe in pointing fingers and self-righteousness.
Well, you haven't answered my question. Have you ever raised an eyebrow about the human rights vacuum that exists on the mainland? Have you?
That's not my business to point a finger at the situation in the mainland. You know, my business as a Hong Kong legislator is to look after the human rights situation and the welfare of my people. And one of the most important rights of Hong Kong people is the right to adequate housing. That's priority number one for me and for our community at the moment.
If you want an example, Regina Ip, of rights being rolled back in Hong Kong, look no further than last month's new-style election to your Legislative Council, which was announced by China's Parliament last March. China's Parliament, not your Hong Kong's Legislative Council. Out of 153 candidates, there were only about 12 who weren't aligned with the pro-establishment or pro-Beijing factions. No risk of any troublesome opposition there, then, is there?
The new arrangements have enabled us to make room for more elites to join the Legislative Council. We are actually more broadly representative than before, and we managed to get rid of all those who have harmed Hong Kong through the extreme filibuster and opposition to everything on the government's agenda.
Well, your Chief Secretary, John Lee, explained it in even clearer terms. He said those who'd been excluded were traitors who would want the vote to fail. So all was well. The patriots are in charge, the traitors in jail, all the rest cowed into submission. But never mind about rights and freedoms. Hong Kong was stable again. That's just what you wanted, isn't it? Hong Kong stable.
That's an oversimplification. You know, we have members in our council who are raising objections to a lot of government proposals. You know, we have a new council which is full of new, bright and fresh ideas about governance and how to improve the livelihood of the people. And I think there is no question of rights and freedoms being rolled back. By the way, if I could remind you, our new structure with a 40-member election committee, that's an electoral college. An electoral college arrangement is nothing new. It was first introduced by the British, and we had it after 1997. You know, the democratic arrangements in the past 24 years is an experiment. If it has not served Hong Kong people well, in the sense that it has not helped to solve our livelihood, economic development problems, housing problems, it ought to be reviewed and revised. And this is what we are doing now.
Well, you talk about serving the Hong Kong people. The Hong Kong public told you what they thought of your new election system by staying at home in huge numbers, despite your desperate campaign to get them out to vote. There was a record low turnout for Hong Kong, 30.2%, a huge drop from the previous legislative election 5 years ago, in which 58% voted. That didn't go well for you, did it?
You can't compare the 30% turnout rate with the turnout rate for the previous election, because we have a new electoral system.
Yeah, and one that the public doesn't like.
Geographical constituencies have been redrawn, and new structure. You see, when the British pushed democratic reform in the final days of their governance in Hong Kong in the 1980s, the first round of elections under new rules also only had 30%. I think 30% turnout is a very good performance.
Really? Well, that's one way of spinning it. I mean, why bother to turn out?
Look at the New York mayoral election recently. The turnout rate was only 23%.
We're not looking at New York. We're looking at Hong Kong and comparing to the kind of buy-in that the public had for the election 5 years ago. And in any case, why bother to turn out? Because out of the 90 seats in your expanded council, only 20 could be directly elected by the public, couldn't they? So the result, as dictatorships always prefer, was a foregone conclusion, wasn't it?
You cannot call a system dictatorial or autocratic just because fewer members were elected by direct elections. I think direct popular elections have their problems. The problems are all over the world. People could end up electing populistic politicians who won by just stirring up emotions through sloganeering, who cannot really get things done and who cannot solve governance problems. I think we are better off with our tripartite structure, with those representing the districts, some representing functional constituencies, and some like an upper house in a parliament, including elites and a diversity of representatives, including one woman representing the New Territories indigenous residents.
These were elections, Regina Ip, with draconian regulations attached to them. Just in case anyone recommended returning blank ballots to protest at the changes, your authorities have thought up a new crime to cover that. Incitement of others to cast blank ballots, maximum sentence 3 years in jail. One more bonfire of political rights in Hong Kong. You can't even object anymore.
You know,
that's not draconian. 3 years in jail.
I don't think it's right to call it draconian. You know, you can't call it draconian if you incite people to vote or not to vote, to interfere with the outcome. That is nothing short of criminal. I think that sort of conduct should not be, should not be allowed.
One of the chief targets of your government and Beijing's anger have been the independent journalists in Hong Kong. June the 17th last year, your police were in action for the second time against Apple Daily, the only pro-democracy print newspaper in Hong Kong, and you raided it. Do you remember how many police your government sent into the newspaper offices that day, June the 17th? Do you remember?
The Apple Daily is not an independent newspaper. It's a political platform for mobilization against the government.
Well, you say that.
Mr. Jimmy Lai
do you remember how many police were sent there?
Mr.
Do you remember how many police were
publicly
there?
declared he is an agent of the U.S. He said that he shared the common values of the U.S.
and that makes him an agent.
Fights the U.S. war on enemy ground. He said it himself, and he said he was at the forefront of the Occupy Central movement.
You're not going to answer my question, Regina. 500 police were sent to raid the offices of a newspaper. No, it isn't irrelevant.
A lot of evidence to collect. You need to send a lot of police.
500 police. What did they think they were going to find there? Piles of submachine guns, helicopter gunships on the roof. What were they looking for?
All police force, all they removed were computer files and documents. The police have every right to collect the evidence they needed if they have reasonable doubts that offences have been committed.
This paper had been publishing for 26 years, and finally it was a threat to national security. As your chief, as a
tabloid.
As your Mr. Lee called it, he said, using journalistic work to incite foreign forces to impose sanctions on the Hong Kong and China. Was that the best charge he could come up with? It's getting pretty hysterical, isn't it?
Jimmy Lai admitted himself. He said it himself. Jimmy Lai said it himself publicly. He told CNN, after calling on very senior U.S. officials, that he shared common values with the U.S. And
why shouldn't he share common values with whoever he wants?
China. Well, he is regarding China as U.S. enemy ground, if he's not a U.S. proxy or as U.S. agent, what is he? By his own admission. This is public record. He said it to CNN. And he also said in 2014 that he is at the forefront of the Occupy Central by his own admission.
Why shouldn't he be? Why shouldn't he have his opinions?
If he works for U.S. interests, if he uses his newspaper as a U.S. propaganda tool or a platform for incitement of secession, why should we charge him? Why shouldn't we charge him? The question is, from the point of view of protecting our national security, why shouldn't we charge him? Why shouldn't we investigate? What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with it is that it's been widely condemned around the world. The British government put in its latest report on Hong Kong, mainland Chinese and Hong Kong authorities have used the law and related institutions. Can I just say this? Can I just say this? Mainland Chinese and Hong Kong authorities have used the law and related institutions against all opposition, free press and civil society in Hong Kong. And you'll go on doing that until you've taught Hong Kong a lesson that the mainland instilled in many years ago. Do as Beijing says, or it will crush you. That's the lesson, isn't it?
Can I speak now?
Please.
Come off it. The British government has no credibility. They have been using this sort of methods to oppress pro-China organizations and pro-China activists all the time until they were prepared to withdraw and change our laws so that We cannot use the laws against people who are anti-China and harming China's national security. The British government have no credibility whatsoever. They have done a lot of harm to Hong Kong in the last 10 years of their rule in Hong Kong.
You called one country, two systems China's unification project. And it is unification, isn't it? But it's by threat, it's by detention, it's by imprisonment, and laws that stifle all political and civil opposition, just as it's done on the mainland. Are you proud of that, Regina Ip?
Well, Hong Kong was brought back to the motherland by negotiation with the agreement of Britain. Look, the Sino-British joint negotiation, joint declaration. China said, I want to resume exercise of sovereignty over Hong Kong in 1997, and Britain said, I will restore Hong Kong to China. It was a bilateral agreement through peaceful negotiation, and it worked well until some people exploited Hong Kong's openness and freedom to do things that undermine China's sovereignty, security, and national interests.
100 years of the Chinese Communist Party last year, marked by Beijing. All that power, Regina Ip, for all that time, and they still can't stand any criticism. Why are the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party so insecure?
That is totally unfair. They have lived with severe, extremely unfair criticisms of the Chinese Communist Party for 24 years, all the time. My colleagues, my former colleagues, have freedom of expression in the Legislative Council. The media are free to criticize the Chinese Communist Party. They are free to do that. What you said is just simply not true.
Not true. Anyone who criticized them is smeared and insulted. Look at Paul Harris, former chairman of the Hong Kong Bar Association. He said the new national security law was not consistent with the rule of law. Chinese state media turned around and called him a running rat and said he should resign. UN Human Rights Office was told to mind its own business after objecting to your new security law. Mind your own business.
What's wrong with that? That's all part of a healthy debate on the state of freedoms in Hong Kong. If you have a position on our national security law, as Paul Harris did, he should be prepared to face rebuttals.
It was more than rebuttals,
our
wasn't it?
Our national security law, well, it's a forceful rebuttal. We need to make our position clear to the Bar Association. In fact, the Bar Association should stick to the law, not to politics, and not to smear our national security law.
Regina Ip, with all its birthday celebrations, China's trying harder than ever to cover up its brutal past, isn't it? At least 3 monuments to the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre have now been removed from Hong Kong campuses, and police have tried to stop the June 4th candlelight vigils in Victoria Park marking the killings, allegedly because of COVID risks. In 2020, you told me you didn't think there'd be any difference to these commemorations after the security law came into force. Well, you were dead wrong, weren't you? Dead wrong.
Well, the statues were removed by the decisions of the university authorities.
That's what they said. That's just an excuse. Nobody believed that. Nobody believed that. I don't think you believe it yourself,
well,
do you?
I think it's an autonomous decision made by the governance bodies of the universities. Point number 1. As for June 4th vigils, last year definitely they could not be held because of COVID. Now this year, we are in the grip of our 5th wave, and mass gatherings must not be allowed. I cannot predict what happens in June. But if the COVID situation continues, there are legitimate health concerns. My own personal view on June 4th.
On the day of the vigil last year, police arrested the vice chair of the organizing group for those vigils, Hong Kong Alliance, and cordoned off the park. In September, they froze the Alliance's assets, they closed its June the 4th museum, deleted its social media account, and arrested its 4 leaders for inciting subversion. Was all that due to COVID as well?
That has nothing to do with June 4th vigils. That's because that organization has at its agenda overthrowing one-party rule. That is, overthrowing China's system. Of course, that could amount to subversion. That could go against our national security law. Now that we have national security law in force, we have to ensure that these activities do not violate national security laws. As simple as that.
So they're not coming back again, these vigils, are they? They're never going to be allowed back. And trust the motherland, you said. But to do what? Whitewash embarrassing history? They're good at that, aren't they?
These vigils, if they become a tool, a political tool for inciting hatred or antipathy against the motherland, that will do much more harm to Hong Kong than we should allow, you know. It's as simple as that.
Regina Ip, it's been good to have you back on Conflict Zone. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me again.